Hey, what's up guys? Today we're going to check out the difference between the ZHIYUN Crane 1 version 2 and the ZHIYUN Crane 2. I'm not throwing the ZHIYUN Crane Plus into this mix just because I haven't tried that unit, I haven't tested it out, so I just don't know what to expect out of it, but based on what I've read, it's more or less the middle model in between the V2 here and the Crane 2. This video is probably more so for those of you who do have the ZHIYUN Crane 1 version 2 and maybe you're contemplating on upgrading to the Crane 2 or not, or maybe you're in the market for a 3-axis gimbal stabilizer and just at a price point to see what is your best bang for your buck. So we'll talk about everything throughout the video, but let's just start off with the cases for now. So I have the ZHIYUN Crane 1 version 2 on the left and I have the ZHIYUN Crane 2 on the right. So just looking at the cases, you can already tell there's a major difference in terms of material that they use, and looking into this a little bit more, you're going to see that in terms of convenience, the cases do play a role into this. You'll notice that the Crane 2 case is a little bit shorter and wider as well than the Crane 1 version 2 case, and that's because the Crane 2, when it's packed away into the box, it's already pre-assembled, so you don't have to worry about putting it together to start shooting. So that's pretty convenient. Also comes with a shoulder strap as well. It's zippers. It's not a hard shell plastic case, but it is a hard case, so it still offers a great deal of protection for your crane when transporting or traveling. The Crane 1 version 2 case, I like the fact that it does have a hard shell plastic case and it's buckle versus zipper, but the only caveat here is that in order to store your Crane 1 version 2 away into the case, you do have to disassemble it, and then you have to assemble it again when you take it out of your case. So there is a little bit of a setup time before you can start shooting and putting away your crane as well after you're done shooting, whereas the Crane 2 is a lot better for run and gun shoots and traveling and all that, because you can just open up the case, whip it out, and power it on, and you're good to go. So inside you can see that there's foam inserts. You can customize the foam inserts a little bit to add a little bit more accessories in here for storage. So like I said, the Crane 1 version 2, it's not assembled when it's stored away in the case, so we can go ahead and assemble it. You have your batteries here. Here I stored the table stand that came with my crane, and then underneath that has the handle where your batteries are housed. Opening up the Crane 2 now, you can see inside that there are no foam inserts, so you can't really customize this case to add more accessories or store more accessories in here. But you can see that the Crane 2 is already assembled, so you can just whip it out, mount your camera, and you are good to go. So here I have them side by side. Appearance wise, you can already see that there's a huge difference between the two. The Crane 2 is a lot bigger, it's a lot thicker than the Crane 1 V2. But what I like about the appearance of the Crane 2 is that it just looks more refined, it looks more of a complete product versus the Crane 1. There's red accents, there's an OLED screen. The screen is a huge improvement over the Crane 1, because with the screen you can see you can now see what mode you're currently in, your battery level, connection statuses, and then depending on what camera you have as well mounted, you can also control camera settings right through the crane. And then over here on the left, you can see that there is a new follow focus dial as well. Now, important to note, most of these new features that ZHIYUN packed into the Crane 2 aren't compatible with all cameras. It's very important to keep that in mind. All these new features are very favorable for Canon DSLR users, so the follow focus, adjusting camera settings are all out of the box with Canon DSLRs. Whereas if you're using mirrorless cameras like Sony and Panasonic, you don't have as much support. The follow focus dial does not work with Sony and Panasonic cameras out of the box. You do have to get the additional motion sensor remote in order to control the focus with the follow focus dial. In terms of technical specs, I'm not gonna talk too much about battery life because between these two, the battery capacity between them are, more than enough to get through an entire day of shooting, because you're not going to constantly have the crane on operating for more than 12 hours straight. So I wouldn't be too concerned about battery. They're both pretty solid performers. The most important technical difference between the two models here would be the payload capacity, and that could be your deciding factor on which one you're going to purchase. So the Crane 1 version 2 handles up to about 4 pounds, whereas the Crane 2 handles up to about 7 pounds. So the first deciding factor between these two on which to purchase is probably going to be your camera setup. So if you are using a mirrorless camera, just know that the Crane 1 version 2 is still capable of handling all mirrorless cameras and most of their lens setups, whereas a Crane 2 opens up to all the DSLRs out there. So if you are a Canon 5D user, let's say, or 6D, using the Crane 1 version 2 was very questionable depending on your setup. You had to have a very, very light lens in order to slap that on. Definitely not an L series lens, or you'd be really pushing the motors to their limit, which affect your battery life, and in turn can also affect the longevity and lifespan of your crane. Crane 2 with 7 pounds, it can pretty much handle all mirrorless cameras. I'd probably say all DSLRs out there as well, and then even cinema grade video cameras out there like the Canon C200, and probably even some RED cameras, depending on the setup with RED cameras as well. And then lastly, between these two here out of the box, the Crane 2 does include a table stand. The table stand is really solid. It's made of metal. It's pretty firm. So you don't have to worry about purchasing another stand for the crane. The Crane 2 also comes with a Manfrotto compatible quick release plate, and that's standard. So that's good if you have a lot of Manfrotto heads with quick release plates. Right out of the box, it's nice to know that it's interchangeable and it's good to go. You don't have to buy any additional quick release plates or anything like that to mount onto the Crane 2 like you had to do with the Crane 1. So those are pretty much the major differences between the Crane 1 version 2 and the Crane 2. The most important features to take into consideration between the two models. Now let's talk about usability, real world uses between these two models. So like I said, it heavily depends on what your setup is to consider which model to go with. Crane 2 does come with a whole bunch of features, but a lot of these features might not be even applicable to you, because I know for me, I have a Sony setup, and I'm not using majority of these new features that ZHIYUN has compact with the Crane 2. I'm not really adjusting my my camera settings too much, usually only if it's a change in lighting, change in environment, change in set, then I would go in to start playing around with my settings too much. In terms of the follow focus, Sony already has an amazing autofocus system already. So ever since switching over to Sony, I haven't even really been using manual focus all too much, just because the autofocus already works extremely well with Sony. So for me, that really boils down to the physical use between these two models. The Crane 2 is a little bit heavier. It's a lot bigger than the Crane 1 version 2. So in terms of advantages over here, I haven't even really seen a major advantage of using the Crane 2 over the Crane 1 version 2, other than having that screen. But like I said, if you already currently own a Crane 1 version 2 and maybe you're considering or thinking about upgrading to the Crane 2, having that screen is absolutely a luxury. It's infinitely better than having no screen at all. It's just nice to know what mode I'm in. It's nice to keep track of my battery life without having to open up the app or anything like that. But that's pretty much where it ends for me. Other than that, physical use of the Crane 2, I find that I do get tired a little bit faster just because it is a little bit heavier. But not only the weight, but because it's thicker. It's thicker than the Crane 1 version 2 in terms of gripping it and grasping it. My arms do get tired a lot faster than using the Crane 1 version 2. It's just a whole lot easier to handle. To use the Crane 1 version 2, you can definitely easily use it with one hand, whereas the Crane 2, I mean, you can use it with one arm, but you know, you're gonna get tired a lot quicker. Most of the time, myself and even other users of the Crane 2, it's always best holding it and gripping it with both arms for more steady shots. So I feel like the dual handle grip is almost necessary for the Crane 2. And that's also one thing to keep in mind, is that if you do currently have the Crane 1 version 2 and you have the dual handle grip, it will not work with the Crane 2. The Crane 2 is just that much thicker that ZHIYUN actually had to make another dual handle grip that supports the thickness of the Crane 2. So upgrading to the Crane 2, if you're thinking of upgrading, that's another thing that you have to factor in, is that you do have to purchase that dual handle grip. And then if you do want to make use of, let's say, some of the new features like the follow focus dial, you have to purchase the additional motion sensor remote if you have a Sony or Panasonic. In terms of price difference between the two, the Crane 2 is almost double the price of the Crane 1 version 2. The Crane 1 version 2 is currently priced at about $400, whereas the Crane 2 is priced at about $750. So that is a big difference in price. And like I said, aside from the price, it really comes down to your setup. So if you have a mirrorless setup, just know that you can get by with the Crane 1 version 2 easily. If you have a DSLR, or maybe you're looking into upgrading to a cinema grade camera like a C200 for example, then you can probably start considering upgrading to the Crane 2 or purchasing the Crane 2. But if you're still using a mirrorless setup and you're not looking into switching anytime soon in the near future back to DSLR or to a cinema grade camera, then save your money and go for the Crane 1 version 2. So I'd say that's pretty much the major differences between the Crane 1 version 2 and the Crane 2. I hope I was able to help you out in terms of coming to a decision between these two models, if you were debating either between these two models, or if you were looking to see if it was worth upgrading or not. So takeaway from this, aside from all the features, before you even look into the features, before you even look into the price between these two and how much your budget is and how much you're willing to spend, really think about the setup that you have, the setup that you are maybe moving towards in the future, and then from there I take into consideration your budget and the prices, and then after that is factoring in these new additional features that the Crane 2 has over the Crane 1. And all of these, all boils back right down to your setup. Like I said, most of the new features that come on the Crane 2 out of the box is supported and favorable for Canon DSLR users. If you're not a Canon DSLR user and you either have, say, Sony mirrorless lineup or Panasonic mirrorless lineup like GH4, GH5, just know that most of these features aren't supported out of the box for these cameras, and you do have to get additional accessories like the motion sensor remote to make use of some of these new features with the Crane 2. So that's it for today, guys. Thanks for watching. If you like the video, give it a thumbs up. Let me know which model that you're going with. If you have any questions about either of them, post it down in the comments below. I usually try my best to get back to all your comments and respond to them. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.